Okay, I did that right. Okay, welcome everyone to tonight's ANC 3-4Gs meeting of the Racial and Social Equity Standing Committee. I'm Lisa Gore, one of the co-chairs, and we'll get started. We have a quorum. We have, I believe, 8 of us on the line. In terms of meeting procedures, it's the standard meeting procedures. We have one community member, Mary Lee Jansen, with us. Thank you, Mary Lee, for joining us again. Hopefully, Mary Lee, you will sign up and be appointed to the permanent committee when we do nominations. So I'll talk about that a little in the agenda. And we also have Bob Ward, who is with us tonight, and is going to talk on some racial equity issues regarding historic districts. And Bob is really, you can introduce yourself, Bob, and tell folks what you do in the Cleveland Park area. And then we have some new topics that we have up for discussion. Common Ground Act, the Chevy Chase Fountain. These are, I think this one, summary of committee accomplishments to date, possible recommendations for the incoming ANC, and Carl, possible joint program on expelled Black Chevy Chase families, and then the committee membership recruitment period, and then open discussion. So just a little change in the agenda. We are going to let Bob do a presentation to us on the historic district and some of the work that he's done with some of the racial inequities involving that. This is Cal. So if you guys don't mind, we'll just deviate from the agenda a little bit just to allow Bob to make that presentation to us. Is that okay with everyone?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. So with that being said, Bob.
I just got here and I didn't hear the question.
It wasn't really, well, we're deviating from the agenda a little bit, Cal. So Bob is going to do a presentation to us on historic district inequities that he's found. So Bob, with that being said, you can go on and get started, and we'll definitely enjoy listening to you and some of the things that you found.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lisa. And nice to meet all of you. So what I'd like to do is let you know what we've been doing down here in Cleveland Park. I'm active in Cleveland Park. I run an organization called Cleveland Park Smart Growth, although the issue with the historic districts is something I've been doing sort of independently. We have a historic district in Cleveland Park. And earlier this year, I gave a presentation that dealt with sort of the exclusionary origins of the neighborhood. That weren't part of the historic district nomination, weren't really part of the conversation in Cleveland Park. And so that, it got me interested in, figuring out where in a broader conversation of racial equity, historic districts fit. And so when I gave the presentation of the research that I found about our neighborhood, which I think is a lot similar to Chevy Chase, quite frankly, in terms of, the intentional exclusion that happened at the origin, whether it was through economic exclusion, through price covenants, and as you got into the 1920s and 30s, through explicit racial exclusionary covenants in property deeds and that sort of thing, and then everything else that happened that was entwined with government policy through redlining and everything else. We capped it off in 1986, 87 with a historic district. And not to say that anybody who was alive in Cleveland Park were of the same mentality that happened when Cleveland Park was founded. But what it did do was it sort of cemented the built infrastructure of Cleveland Park along those original designs. And I got interested in the idea of what does the imposition of a historic district do to a community? And I was on the redistricting commission for Ward 3 this year, and I got really familiar with the software and the population and demographics. And one weekend, I plotted on the redistricting software. It wasn't perfect, but using census blocks, every historic district in Washington, D.C. And that was fun. What I found was that there is an enormous racial disparity in historic districts versus the rest of DC, which is not in historic districts. And by the way, 22% of the people who live in DC live in a historic district. So it's not an insignificant number. There are 37 some odd residential, non-institutional historic districts in DC. Of that, there are only like 3 that are a majority non-white. 61% of people who live in historic districts in DC are white, and 39% of people who don't live in historic districts are white. That's an enormous disparity. So I went looking to see, is there any research on like the impact of historic districts? I found a professor at Georgetown University who I think you're familiar with because he came and spoke to you after he spoke with us earlier this year, Brian McCabe. Who's a sociologist, who's actually now the assistant secretary for HUD for policy and research, and just elected an ANC commissioner in Logan Circle. So like, wow, busy life, Brian. Anyhow, what Brian, in his research, which was based in New York City and not DC, found was that when historic districts are established, regardless of where they, my data showed that they're mostly white, and only a few historic districts were majority Black. But what he found was that once they're established, they become more white. They become higher educated. They become higher income, and you pull those data points together, and what they become is more exclusionary. And so, having had the experience of trying to cobble together my own data with what resources I had, I thought, you know what? DC should be doing this. This is something they should be looking at. There is an entire effort throughout the district government for racial equity analysis. There's the core, which is part of the council, where they examine legislation to see what its racial impact is. The zoning commission has a new racial equity tool where, upzonings and map amendments and PUDs are analyzed through a racial equity lens. Small area plans have to be analyzed through a racial equity lens. There is now an Office of Racial Equity within the administration, and they are doing pilot programs. One of them is with the Office of Planning, which is the umbrella agency under which historic preservation sits. And so what I've done is I've asked the commissioners in ANC 3C to sponsor a resolution that looks at and calls for the Office of Planning and the district government to do some data collection in this area as it relates to historic districts, and come up with some sort of tool that does a racial equity analysis when new historic districts are formed, and does a retrospective look, if they can, to see what has been the impact of the 21% of the people who live in historic districts in DC that have been in existence for the last 30, 40 years. What's happened? You can't evaluate what you can't measure. And we're not measuring any of this stuff because no one's asking these questions. So I guess what I'm asking you is if ANC 3C passes this resolution, or you want to take a look at the draft of this resolution, might be something that you guys would like to consider as well. And I'll pause there, see if you guys have any questions. But that's my.
And I think we already circulated a draft of the resolution. So I believe the attendees have had access to it.
It was supposed to be on the ANC agenda last night. It got pulled off. There was a bunch of commissioners who didn't attend that meeting. I don't know if it'll be back on the December agenda, or will it wait for the new commission that will get seated in January? I don't know. I have confidence that something will pass out of ANC 3C. I'm certainly hounding Brian McCabe, who will now be a commissioner on ANC 2F. That down in Logan Circle, that he take a look at it. But I think, it's something that this isn't a big ask. There's a pilot program right now that Office of Planning is going through to do a racial equity analysis. Historic preservation ought to be a part of it. I don't know what we do with the answer, quite frankly. I don't know. But it may inform reforms to the historic preservation law. It may inform projects of special merit where, decisions get made by the HPRB, but maybe based on a racial equity analysis, there is room for adjusting things. There is an appeal process on things. So anyhow.
It's interesting because I believe HPRB, by their regulations, enabling legislation, whatever you call it, is actually restricted to only considering issues of historic
Criteria.
merit, and their criteria is very restricted. So this would actually, for HPRB to take this sort of thing into account, would be a stretch. It'd be interesting if to get them to do it, but it would be a stretch.
Cal?
Hi, everybody. I am I don't remember which agency it is, has got some kind of an assessment tool related to racial equity. Are you aware of that, Bob, and have you looked at it?
Excuse me. So the zoning commission has one that's been in place now for I'm not sure the whole year, but it's been active. I know we had a map amendment that was considered by the zoning commission earlier this fall, and the Office of Planning and their set down report used the zoning commission's racial equity tool to analyze it. It's that's different from what historic preservation looks at. My big ask is like, they ought to collect data. They have data. They have this information. They just have to pull it together. They know what the demographics are. They know what education levels are. They know what rent and home values are. They know what health outcomes are. If you could apply that to the historic district, but even more importantly, look backwards and see how it's changed since the formation of the historic district, it gives you information. So if you're going to go out and create a new historic district, you've got some perspective to see when this happens, here's what we've seen. And that's like eyes wide open information that we should all have in making a decision. I don't know if it's supposed to, like Ron said, they've got criteria that they have to hew to in terms of what the preservation law specifies. And it's very narrow. And it doesn't allow them to consider a lot of externalities. But maybe the council can consider this in tweaking what the historic preservation law covers. I mean, they're the ones who wrote it. Anyhow.
One more thing, your draft got circulated on Friday, so we haven't had a lot of time to look at it yet. Some of us haven't had a chance to look at it yet.
This is the graph of each of the historic districts and their demographic profiling. Is that what you're talking about?
I forwarded the email that you sent out, Bob.
Okay.
And so it's the two attachments that were connected to that email. I don't have it in front of me now.
Okay.
The article's really good to read.
Yeah,
Thank you.
one is draft
you wrote.
and one is demographics.
Yeah, I mean, the extent to which, I was shocked that there are only a handful of historic districts in DC that are majority Black. I think Anacostia, Kingman Island, or Kingman Park, and there was a handful of others. But like even places like what's right by McMillan, the names are escaping me. I don't have it in front of me.
Woodridge?
Not Woodridge, because of the B. Bloomingdale. So interesting point there. It is not a majority Black ANC. I wonder if it was when it was created, historic district, I mean. And so that's the type of thing. It's like, do historic districts coincide with gentrification? Because again, going back to Professor McCabe's research, that's what he found in New York City was actually happening. Once they were established, demographics did change. they became more white, they became more educated, they became higher income. It was a magnet to draw people in of means and resources. But what that meant was that it probably displaced other people because it was a historic district. You can't physically change it as easily as you could an area that's not a historic district.
Maurice?
Thank you. And Bob, thanks for this and thanks for the information. I agree with Libby that the draft was really, really nice. Are you having any conversations with any other ANCs about them doing their own drafts?
I haven't yet. I'm going to reach out to the folks down on Capitol Hill because I know a few folks down there. As I mentioned, I'm talking with Professor McCabe, who's going to be on the ANC around Logan Circle, another historic district in that area. So I just hope it sort of like gets out there. I know the commissioners on ANC 3C are really excited about this, and they have networks of other ANCs that they're in conversation with. There's a historic district in Adams Morgan that may be interested in getting involved in this. Like I said, there's no shortage of areas in DC where there's historic districts where 1 out of 5 of us live in one.
Bob, let me ask you a question. Has the research shown on the Black historic districts, has research shown any impacts to those areas once they become a historic district?
We don't have the data. I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. So Kingman is a new historic district, and so I'm not sure we'd be able to.
But I mean, like on a national level. So you talked about New York.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I don't know, and I'll ask Brian that because he did that research when he was up with the Furman Center out of NYU. I don't know if any of the historic districts in New York were majority minority, right? And to see what happened to it. So I think they were just looking at what happened to, regardless of where they started, did they become something else after the designation? And what he found is that they did.
Okay. Libby, then Cal.
Bob, do you have an idea, know when most of the historic districts date back to? Were most of them created, years ago, or is it really just dependent on each area? Because if Chevy Chase has made it this long without being in a historic district, it would seem that, especially with the focus now on racial equity and affordable housing, that would seem to be another reason why it should be harder for Chevy Chase to create a historic district. I was astounded when I looked at the list of all the places in DC that have historic districts. I found myself surprised that Chevy Chase doesn't already have one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. And I don't have all the information on when they were all formed. I know that, like I said, Cleveland Park was formed in the mid to late 1980s. I know that there were historic districts that preceded it, but I believe the historic preservation law only dates to the maybe late 60s, early 70s. And so that would have been sort of the origin point for most of them. But there are, like, Bloomingdale's been a historic district for a while. I'm not sure it was the 90s or early 2000s where it was formed, but I would think that the bulk of them were probably formed in the 90s and 2000s. As my eyes have been open and looking at this stuff, there's been a handful of historic districts that have been formed in like the last 5-10 years, but certainly not the majority of them. They predate that time period.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add a footnote. It wasn't for lack of trying that Chevy Chase DC did not have one. There was an attempt between 2004, 2007. And it was actually sponsored by my organization, the Historic Chevy Chase DC. And it failed. The ANC did a survey of the neighborhood, and by a 2-to-1 margin, it was rejected. And the major reason for the rejection at that time was because no one wanted people to mess with their property. Not to put too fine a point on it. And the current, just to add maybe a small point, to pass some intel to Bob while he's with us. My sense of the current campaign to get a historic district is flipped in its rationale, and now it is much more defensive. And so the same people that were against it in 2004 to 2007, many of them, I think, are in favor of it now because they don't want anything in Chevy Chase, DC to change, including the addition of affordable housing and things like that.
It's interesting to go back and look at when Cleveland Park went through this process, and Catalyst actually, so there was a movement to create a historic district in Cleveland Park that went back to the mid 70s. And it sort of foundered about, and they were doing their homework, but it really wasn't going anywhere, and there wasn't a head of steam that was pushing it across the finish line. It wasn't until there was development on our commercial corridor that really catalyzed people, and then in an instant, the historic district was formed. I mean, literally within a year of the proposed demolition of the Park and Shop at Porter and or at Ordway in Connecticut. And you can go back and read the Washington Post articles at the time. And, Tersh Boasberg, who was, one of the founding people in historic preservation in DC, was a chairman of the Historic Preservation Review Board at some point, but was an advocate in forming the Historical Society in Cleveland Park, said, it's like, we ought to be able to decide what gets developed in our neighborhood and what doesn't, which to me isn't really a historic preservation argument, right? That's a land use argument. But that was kind of the mentality of why the historic district, why people coalesced around it. And I consider myself a preservationist. I founded a preservation charity that raises money to restore the Cleveland Park Club here in our neighborhood. I mean, I love old buildings. I love the stories they tell. Historic districts are kind of ham-handed and heavy-handed way of doing that. I mean, I could point out lots of buildings in our neighborhood that should be landmarked because of the unique role that they play or the architecture that they have. Historic districts are kind of like a blanket that really aren't very discriminating about what gets saved and what should get saved and what should everything get saved. In our neighborhood, anything that was built before 1942 gets saved, regardless of whether it's quality or not. And that's kind of weird. And there are buildings that are built in 41 and one in 42, and they happen to be right next to each other. And you could tear down one of them and you can't the other. It's like, this doesn't really seem like good public policy, quite frankly.
As an aside, I learned to swim at the pool at the Cleveland Park Club.
Our neighborhood bathtub. Awesome.
Yeah.
So I had a follow-up question to, I think it was Lisa asked the question about nationally. Have you seen whether the property values have gone up more quickly after, or significantly after a neighborhood becomes a historic district? And also, Carl, I thought I'd heard there was a 4-to-1 against for that initial attempt. I remember reading that somewhere. Anyway, Bob, have you have an insight in property values?
There is some research that suggests that, but what I would love to see happen is, again, it's knowable here in DC as to what happens in historic districts here. You just have to define the geography and plug it into a database, and the historical property values, rent numbers are available. And so I don't know what those numbers are. I haven't done that research, but on a national basis, yes, I think the same study that I was referencing earlier on the demographic changes also showed an increase in property values, but there are others that also show that as well. That formation of the historic district, and by the way, it depends, right? Historic districts don't always happen in affluent urban areas. And that's pretty much what we're talking about. Historic districts can happen in small towns and other places, where, they're falling down, they're falling apart, and, the choice is to preserve them or demolish them. And so I think, it really does depend on where you are. But if you're talking about high opportunity, affluent historic districts in primarily urban areas, I think the evidence shows that the property values absolutely go up with the
Right.
incomes of the residents.
I have a follow-up question on this of my own, which is that when you all did the Cleveland Park Historic District, I'm imagining the climate might have been different here because we are uncovering a lot of racist legacy and underneath the surface, I would say, at least on the unconscious level, there are efforts to try to maintain the advantages of that. Was that any part of what happened when Cleveland Park decided to do that? Or are we looking at a different situation here?
Well, as somebody who was old enough to witness these efforts, a lot of the efforts like Cleveland Park Historic District, it was never discussed. Just wasn't on the table. I mean, is it a subtext? Maybe in retrospect, yes, but it was never really discussed. I do think, just to add one thing to the piece you guys were just talking about on the property values, I think that would be interesting information to look at, because one of the arguments from the advocates for historic district in this area are that the expectation is that a historic district would maintain some of the small houses that are in the area, and therefore they would be more affordable. They would remain more affordable because they would remain smaller. Now, the obvious answer is how'd that work out in Georgetown? But some data to answer some of those questions might be helpful.
I agree. And to your point, Cal, when the historic district in Cleveland Park was formed, so we have the nomination, and so we can go through and read through it. And as I read through it, one of the things it highlights, and this is one of the criteria points as an exemplary urban planning example, which is one of the historic preservation criteria, they pointed to the developer of Cleveland Park, this guy John Sherman of the Cleveland Park Company, who was enlightened and benevolent. Seriously, they didn't have to use those words, but they used those words. What we know now is that he made sure that there was a price floor of which you couldn't go under to build houses, and that kept the riffraff out, right? I mean, that was the whole point of these covenants that were put into the property values. You couldn't build a house that was less than $5,000 in 1900. And when that changed, they went explicitly to racial covenants. Now, John Sherman was gone at that point. But my point is that they looked at this lovely community that they built. And to Ron's point, they weren't thinking about race. They're thinking about, oh, this neighborhood, great. And oh, this guy planned it out and it was awesome. And they didn't dig a little deeper to find out that it was awesome for some people, but it was not awesome for everybody. And when apartment buildings came to Cleveland Park, they were built in if you come down here and you can see all the lovely little apartment buildings that are on our side streets, on Porter, on Rodman. There's one here, I live on Macomb Street. There's one up right across from Tregaron. They were built within a 3 or 4 year window. And the Citizens Association, once they saw these apartment buildings went up, they said, absolutely not. We have to change the zoning law to prohibit apartment buildings being built in our neighborhood because it brings the wrong kind of people. Literally, it brings the wrong kind of people. And the developers were like, where do you want the government workers who are like clerks to live? They got to live somewhere. They're going to find affordable housing in apartment buildings. This is like 1923 when these conversations were happening, and they're in the newspaper articles of the time. But anyhow, when they formed the historic district, they didn't look at any of that.
Thank you, Bob.
Any other questions?
So in terms of, if we take a look at this resolution and want to support it, then we could, send a letter or or suggest to our ANC that they have a resolution that is in support of this, which we would send to 3E sometime before their next meeting.
Yeah, we can, there's a couple things I think you can do. You could, take the resolution that 3C is already drafted and draft it to fit, our community. If there's any tweaks you want to do, and we could submit that to the ANC and ask them to pass that. There's, a couple ways you can handle it. But if, the committee really wants to move that resolution forward, maybe we could get like, one or two people to kind of work on getting that language together and, moving it forward. Because we only have November 28th and December 12th remaining for this commission in session before we have a new commission that comes over. If we have a new commission that comes over, we're just a little bit, I don't know all of the new folks, so I'm not sure which way, how they would take or perceive this. And I'm not sure how much they've been privy to the historic district conversation. So I think it would take a lot more educating and possibly convincing, whereas this commission is pretty aware of that argument. And they're also very familiar with you all. So just some things to keep in mind when you're considering what you want to do.
Okay, I do think it's important that to support, what Bob's talking about doesn't take a position on whether there should be a historic district anywhere.
Right.
It's a request to, and Bob, correct me if I get it quite wrong, but it's a request to Office of Planning to gather the information that would allow them to apply a racial lens to some of the decisions in the future regarding historic districts.
That's exactly right. It doesn't take a position on historic districts at all. It's just, it's literally, let's get the data together and inform ourselves. And then what happens, what happens after that is an unwritten story.
By the way, Bob, I just went to the page on the resolution in your email and it says 404 not found.
Oh, which link is that? Thank you for letting me
in
know.
your Friday email that Ron forwarded to us with the two links, the one that points to the resolution.
Yeah, it's not there.
Yeah, go to the website of the ANC, go to 3C, 3C.org, and it's on their site.
Well, okay, because this link is an an3c.org
Yeah,
link.
just Google it, ANC 3C.
I'm looking for it.
Yeah, well, he's talking about that. Maybe it's worth pointing out that in conversation with people on the preservation side of OP, if you engage them in conversation about historic districts, they're pretty clear that they're not interested in history in the way that we're talking about it. What they're interested in is architecture. So, I mean, as we go forward with this, and Bob, I hope you're successful in all your endeavors as a data gathering exercise, but also beyond that, when it comes to actually policy, it's important to probably change the mindset within the preservation side of OP, because they think it's all about architecture and not about history.
I agree with you, Carl. And I think ultimately this is we're going to have to reform our historic preservation law, and so that it is not so siloed. There are ways in which we can, acknowledge history and acknowledge architecture, but that we don't take into consideration any other public policy objective, whether it be racial equity or affordable housing or sustainability. none of those things can be considered by historic preservation. They only have a very narrow lane in which they decide. And frankly, I think the law should be a little bit broader than that, that takes things into consideration and actually weighs cost benefits, whether it's this or other things, but that can only happen at the council level. And I you know, what I found is that preservationist professionals are really well-intentioned people, and they're really good at what they do in terms of the study of the architecture, as you say. But any talk of change of how things work doesn't get received very well.
Okay, you guys, we're gonna have to wrap this.
Sorry to take so much time.
Okay.
No, it's been perfect. I think
Great.
the committee needs to kind of decide if you guys want to proceed with the resolution to the ANC. You know, who maybe wants to be in charge of getting that together, and what meeting you want to do that.
I think we should definitely do it.
I mean, I'm happy to take Bob's resolution, and assuming that, you know, we can change a few names to protect the innocent and create a document that we can forward to the ANC. You know, that's not a huge task. And in my spare time, if I can find some spare time,
Are
I
you
can
familiar with
knock that out.
Google? Ron?
Huh?
Are you familiar with Google?
Google, yeah, I think we can get it up on a Google Doc so
If
that
you put it
other-
up on a Google Doc and send us a link, I mean, I'll be more than happy to help out with it.
Okay, all right, I'll put that on the list for the next day or two.
And you guys want to try to get this ready? I'm thinking December 12th, in all honesty. What do y'all think? Do you think we
My
can get it
feeling
ready
is
by the
that-
28th?
Remember what happened the last time we put something off to the last meeting? It got punted. So I would suggest the next meeting, unless your agenda doesn't permit it.
I mean, we can probably get it out of our committee in a, you know, by by the end of the week.
Okay. We just need to give the ANC about 7 days, because we will put it up on our site, and our rule unofficial rule is to have resolutions with a 7-day purview.
All right,
That's
I'll try and
only-
get something out at least between you and I tomorrow,
Okay.
Lisa.
Ron, can
Okay,
you post a link to that to everybody, please?
sure.
Not just for me, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, that's 6 days from today.
Yeah, well, that's why we'll start aiming for tomorrow and see what happens.
Yes, I agree. All right, thank you, Bob. You can definitely hang on, and we will proceed through our agenda, but thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I'm going to check out.
Okay,
Hey,
you.
before you go, I tried to Google this resolution and I can't
I'll
find
send it to
anywhere.
you. We'll send it around.
And if I find a working link, I'll forward it to you as well.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Bob.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
All right, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
So next thing I had put on the agenda, I don't know if everyone, some of these, so let me just start by saying this. We had quite a few topics that came up as suggested items for the agenda. One of them that Randy sent around was a common ground legislation that Council Member Robert White is proposing. I don't know if you guys remember that email, but it's basically legislation about land use. He says, and this is just from his newsletter, this bill significantly reforms what the city does with public land it no longer uses. And it says, my goal with this bill is to use public lands to create more affordable housing, build more multi-bedroom units for families, and increase community input. I haven't had a chance to read the legislation. Just curious if any of you all had, and if that's something that you guys want to take up.
I read it. And it seems very good and very sensible. It puts a lot of emphasis on the importance of housing that is 3 rooms or larger for families.
Okay,
It talks about the numbers that are actually needed. And what else?
and we don't have to with this one, we can have this maybe in our back burner when we're doing some of our housing work. Because I think one of the things that Randy said, and I agree with him, I think it's more important to tackle this or be prepared when this comes up for hearing, with supporting resolution or testimony or something like that. So it's not something that we have to immediately be concerned with. Cal?
That's what I was just about to ask. Is there a by when date we need to do something if we're going to do something?
I reached out to his office and shot them an email, and haven't heard back from them yet. So I'll follow up. And I know Randy was gonna try to figure out when they're roughly coming up for a hearing as well.
And this is sort of something that, is in my bailiwick a little bit. I think it's important, if we're going to take positions relative to these sort of issues, that we really understand how, what is Robert White talking about that the mayor's not already talking about? What is Council Member George talking about that's different than what Robert White's talking about, or what the mayor's talking about? Are these all things that can exist parallel to one another, or is it one or the other? And they're frankly very technical, complicated issues. I think we need to just not jump the gun too quickly to say this is an answer or that's an answer without really drilling down on these policies.
I agree.
I think there's a lot of grandstanding going on because,
yeah.
I mean, how can you go wrong if you're a politician and you say, I want more affordable housing, or or the rent's too damn high? Yeah, it is. But why is your solution better than the next guy's?
Yeah,
So.
and my offer was for them to come and speak and actually discuss the legislation. So maybe that's why I haven't heard back. I don't know. But yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, these issues, I think we have to know the nitty gritty. And I mean, if they're proposing legislation that they want community members to support and ANCs to support, then they should be able to come and talk to us about their legislation. I don't think that's a lot to ask. But, I definitely thought it was, and I agree with Randy, it's interesting. It's something that we, would probably lean towards, but I mean, without further explanation and understanding all the particulars.
Looks like it's supported, at least it's signed by Anita Bonds, Rhiannon Nadeau, Janice Lewis George, several others. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we'll just put this one on the back burner, and if he or his office gets in touch with us, we'll proceed from there. Chevy Chase Fountain, we can maybe put that on a back burner too. But when we had sent or put this on the agenda, so Ruth Robbins is going back and forth with the legislators on the Maryland side and DC side. So Norton, the Maryland legislators, to try to get Newland's name removed from the fountain. And she was really trying hard to do that around this time frame where the construction work was still going on. The most recent information that I got from Ruth is right now certain things are on hold, particularly a discussion with National Park Service. So I definitely want to put this one on the back burner until we get some more information from Ruth. But if they wanted us to get involved, this group has always taken up the issue of the fountain. It might be good that we do a letter, and that's what Ruth, I believe, and her organization did. And Carl, did Chevy Chase Historic District get involved in this too?
Historic Chevy Chase DC?
Yeah, Historic Chevy Chase DC, the fountain issue.
Yeah, I served with Ruth and several others in a committee that was convened by the Park Service, National Park Service, to do some contextualizing signage. This has nothing to do with taking the name of Newlands, which is behind me here, off. That's a separate issue. And my guess is that because of what just happened last week, a week ago today, just now coming into fruition tonight as we talk, with the changing majority in the House of Representatives, that's not going to go anywhere. So I think the Park Service is going to be gun shy because of that. Is my own personal opinion. And therefore, the only thing that's left is what we've been working on, and that is that contextualizing a sign that says who Newlands is and why he's being honored by this fountain.
Okay. Okay.
And that's the fountain. The sign is done, so it's going to go into the ground. I should have added that last piece because that's something that I think definitely want to be involved with. Right? We want to celebrate the signage at least. We want to be out there saying, "Look at this, folks." You know, this is something everybody wants to see when they go by that fountain.
Now, you said the signage is done.
It's done.
When is it going up?
We don't know, but it's done. That's a technical matter now. It's in the hands of the people that are actually digging the hole on the circle, on the perimeter, right? So it's going to be near the Bethesda Presbyterian Church, looking toward the fountain as you pass it. So that's the best vantage point we could find as a committee to actually put this signage.
Okay. Can you keep this group up to date with that, and so that we don't miss? I'm assuming it's going to be an unveiling or something.
Yeah, I mean, Ruth, you know, I just talked to her tonight when we were all together a few hours ago.
Yeah.
And the latest is that she doesn't know yet, but they're thinking it's going to happen soon. They just don't know when.
Okay.
So can I just ask a question, Carl? The sign name change is what is being held up, but you're able to put in a sign. I mean, the name change of the fountain is what's being held up, but we're able to put in a sign right now which explains, talks
Who
about
was
in this
and
past.
yeah, and why there's a fountain there.
Okay.
Carl, you said it was it's on the periphery of the circle. Is it going to be outside of the sidewalk, and pedestrians who travel the outside of the circle are going to be able to read it? Or are they going to be on both sides, or how is this?
Well, it's for pedestrians, so we don't want people looking out of their car windows and crashing. So it's going to be on the side facing the sidewalk.
Yeah.
So when pedestrians walk by it, they'll be able to see the sign, and it's a sign like, you know, any other wayside sign that the National Park Service puts up. There are standards, and we had to work within the parameters that were set by the National Park Service.
Okay. Well, that'll be good. Once that gets, you know, hopefully a date set. I'm sure the committee would like to know, and definitely the ANC, and we all celebrate at least that new signage.
Yeah, as soon as I know something, I'll pass it along. But I'm sure that you'll hear first from Ruth anyway.
I hope so. Get it one way or the other.
Right.
Cal, you said you wanted to talk about something before the accomplishments?
Yeah, two things. One, and this is a really quick yes or no, probably. Has there been any further movement or developments on the call boxes? Because first there was the Morrison one, then there was the Oliver one, and don't know where we are with any of that. If no progress has been made, the answer is no.
What do you mean any more progress? So
Well,
the
there
only-
were people who were trying to come up with stuff for the Oliver Street one, I think opposite the bus terminal. And that was, I remember us talking about that last time we had a meeting, but I've not heard anything since.
Yeah, I think the ANC we discussed that at the ANC meeting, and we gave an overview that they weren't, I think Maria, I can't remember the name, or somebody that was recommended, and they basically were not going to go with that person named. I can't remember who that name was, but that call box is already done.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's already been
I can
dedicated.
give an update.
Oh.
That's something that HCCDC is in partnership with CHART and the citizens or the community association.
Newland's name, somebody had recommended Newland's
Oh,
added in there. Is that what
Fulton.
you're talking about, Cal?
No, that was the first one with Fulton, and we basically, that got killed. I'm not sure how it got killed. But then that was the one at Morrison Street from the diner. Then there was the Oliver Street. Gordon, right. And then there was the Oliver Street one. The focus shifted to that, and I never heard anything about that.
Yeah, I mean, the ANC we hadn't talked about those.
Okay, all right. So the answer is no.
Do you want an update?
Do you have an update?
Yeah.
I'm in one of the organizations that is the partner for this project, and I've been keeping a close eye on it. So it's a little opaque. There's a committee that meets for the 4 organizations involved. But what's happened now is that there was a negotiation, of course, for the sign that already went up on the first call box that was unveiled on Chevy Chase Day back in September. Everything has to be fought, just like we spent a year, on 250 words on the sign that we were just talking about before. We didn't have a year this time. We only had 2 weeks. And if that call box, the one that was unveiled, went up without a fight, there would be no mention of any racial dimension whatsoever on it. They wanted to focus initially just on the bus turnaround, on the trolley car, right? And saying that this is a trolley car community without saying, well, who's taking the trolley or not taking the trolley and why, and so forth and so on. So that had to be fought as well. So every line that goes into these things is a discussion. And I can tell you that. The next one that will be unveiled is a bit out of the way. It's near the Carnegie Institution. And it'll be a piece of artwork on one side, and on the other side, it'll be language text about Vera Rubin, who worked there. Was an important astronomer in the U.S. and the first woman that was allowed to observe in a major, observatory in the United States and worldwide probably. And came close a couple of times to winning the Nobel for theory of dark matter, which is traceable to her research. So that will be next. And I'm working on language for a call box in front of where Walter Tilbriner used to live on the corner of Rittenhouse and 33rd Street. Tilbriner was the last appointed mayor of Washington, D.C. before we got modified home rule back in 1974. And Tilbriner was appointed by President Kennedy in 1961. And what you have to know about Tilbriner is that he was the president of the Board of Education when the DC public schools were desegregated. And that's an important period because he had to work with the presidents, Eisenhower, then Kennedy, then Johnson, on all manner of social legislation, and including desegregation. So an important guy in our neighborhood.
Carl. So the other item I wanted to bring up was tomorrow there's a introduction to the racial action plan, equity action plan. Tomorrow, and I know Libby, I think you said you were going. I'm not sure if I'm going to go. I just wanted to mention that I had a conversation. Ronald Kahn would have had conversations with Dr. Hewitt, who runs the Office of Racial Equity at the time they just started. I had a conversation with her a couple of weeks ago, just before I went to California. Could have gave her the heads up of what's happening in our neighborhood, so she wasn't really aware specifically that much about what's happening. So I kind of got her up to speed, and we talked about the possibility of her coming and to one of our meetings. And I wanted to find out if y'all are interested in that, and if you want to do it either before we disband and reform, or you want to wait until the new year. But first, do you like to have Dr. Hewitt come and spend a half an hour with us?
Yeah, I mean,
That's fine.
yeah.
Yep. Okay. And secondly, before December or later?
Hmm.
And there are pros and cons. Like if she would come, she would talk about the process for the action plan. It's kind of misleading. What she told me doesn't look like what the announcement was. The announcement says we're launching it. What they're launching is a conversation about it, and they're going to use that to produce a draft probably before we have our next meeting. She said in a few weeks, but she couldn't commit to a specific time frame. And then there'll be a regular public comment period, which probably will spill over into next year, I'm guessing. And then there'll be a little bit next year.
It'd be good to have her come when we have the new commissioners.
I would agree.
Well, do you want her to come to an ANC meeting, or want her to come to a RAISE meeting?
I think it should be the new raise. That would be my
Okay.
guess, because it's the last meeting potentially before the new, and there won't be any action. I don't think that we could act on it, so it's probably best that it would happen in the next iteration.
Got it. Unless we wanted to mobilize people to make comments on their draft during the comment period, but we don't really need to have her come to that, I suppose. All right. So unless I hear somebody, what do you
Well,
think? Go ahead, Renee.
I agree with what Maurice said, but then on the other hand, if she comes now, she will get a sense of another representation, possibly another representation in the community, not knowing what the new committee will be like. So, she can come down, meet us, and then next year she may meet a new group of people.
Well, actually, we did say or both. I remember having that.
Okay.
You said whatever y'all want to do, let me know, and we'll see how it works with the schedule.
What do you
Ron,
think?
didn't we meet with her? Ron, didn't you and I and Randy meet with her a couple months ago?
Who's that? What's your name?
Dr. Hewitt, the director of the new Office on Racial Equity.
I don't
think so.
I was part of that.
Okay.
She sort of sounded like the only person she'd really talked to was Ron and Randy. That was it.
Ron Kahn.
Yeah, Ronald. Oh, you changed it. You're confusing me, Ron.
What's that?
Ronald with your name on the screen there. I called him Ronald. I referred to him as Ronald, and you had Ron, so we know who we're talking about. Well, because I'm supposed to follow up with her. And
So what would she
all
be
wanna do.
meeting with us on? Would she be going over the office? Is there a specific ask from her or from us? What's the basis of the meeting?
well, she might be wanting to do if she came early, it would probably be to go over the racial equity plan with us in some depth, and maybe you know, I don't know how that would be. If she came later, I would imagine to look at broader issues that, you know, are stemming from Chevy Chase. For her to take into consideration.
And when is the
Yeah.
racial equity plan coming up for comment or discussion?
She doesn't know that, so this conversation at, what time is it, 11, Libby?
11 to 12:30.
Yeah,
That's tomorrow.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's down in
Oh, it's-
Shaw.
Yeah. I've attended webinars before where she speaks, and she's very impressive. So I think we want to, you know, take advantage of the fact that she can give a broad overview, maybe before we start telling her about what we're doing.
Yeah, that would be my suggestion too. Now, I'm just trying to get the full context of what's going on with the racial equity plan. So is she having community conversations? And one happens to be in Shaw tomorrow?
That's the first one.
Ah,
And
I
Libby,
thought tomorrow was the mayor who's kicking off publicly the racial equity program.
Yeah, I gotta go back and
Um,
look at it again.
Let me see. Are you looking at it, Cal?
It's more general.
Join Mayor Bowser for the launch of the district's inaugural racial equity action plan. But when you actually go to the page, it says the folks are invited to a conversation about the racial equity thing. Because my sense of it is we are not that close to them having a draft.
well, why don't we try to get her to have a conversation up here? I mean, what communities is she going to?
I think they've been encouraging conversations with anybody who will meet with them. I think they really have been trying to seek out input. So I think it would be good for us to meet.
Yeah, as you recall, some of us had gone to events that they were running earlier on. And that was actually the mayor's committee.
Was that before this office was formed? Carl?
I'm embarrassed. I'm confused about the two bodies. The one that I'm referring to now is the mayor's, the one that works out of the mayor's office.
Okay, so I'm putting in the chat the 2-paragraph description of what's happening tomorrow from the page. And then I'll get back to Zoom.
But, you know, honestly, I haven't been following this, but it certainly seems reasonable to me that if there's an organized effort by the mayor's office or the council or whatever that is dealing with issues that this committee is committed to dealing with that locally, that we should be invite those people to brief us on what they're going to do. And we can figure out afterwards how we want to fit into that if it's different than what they're doing, but they should just brief us on their program.
I agree. I mean, this is something I think that's right up the committee's alley. My recommendation would be to call her, see if we can get them on the agenda as soon as possible. Maybe we can even have, a special meeting. The ANC obviously should want to attend, and I would think you would get some community participation as well.
So I remember now that I even mentioned we might just have a special meeting for this.
Mhm.
So
Oh, great, Cal, yeah.
I need to have some consensus of the group of what we want me to do.
Yeah, I think I would say Cal, maybe shoot her email and see if she can meet with the committee, see what her availability is, ask her to give us a few dates. And let's just set up a special meeting with her.
Yeah, tell her we've almost solved all the problems up here and we'd be happy to share our experience with them.
Oh, by the way, I did direct her to the task force's recommendations.
Yeah, that's
I
great.
did get her hooked up with that. I don't know if she had a chance to read it. Yeah. So I think where we left it was, she said, let me know when the next meeting is. I'll look at my calendar. And then we can also alternatively talk about special meeting. But it sounds like, Lisa, you're more advocating a special meeting because I think this is more than a half an hour.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so.
Just strategically in terms of the visibility and the impact of this committee on the community at large, if this is something that we are essentially sponsoring, if you will, as bringing an effort, a district-wide effort to the attention of the Chevy Chase DC community, that's a kind of thing we should be doing.
Yep.
And let everybody know that without this wonderful committee, this sort of stuff would just fly under the radar.
I agree.
Well, I love it if, I guess nobody took notes. Libby, you taking notes?
Yeah.
Oh, Libby, you're taking notes?
Yeah.
Kinda.
Well,
It's recorded, Cal. You can look
I
back at
know.
the
I
conversation.
want to go back and use some of the language that I've heard in this conversation to formulate my next email to her.
Okay.
Okay.
And you send around the draft. I mean, just whatever you propose. If you want to send it, do the same thing like with the Dropbox or Google Doc. You can that might be a good way to do it, and pass it out. Me, Randy, we got Ron, Libby, whoever wants to help out on that. And
just
we
going to
can
be a
get
paragraph, so it's going to be very short. I'm just mostly going to deal with the person who does the scheduling for her.
But I think it's important though in your email to set the context.
Yes, absolutely.
It is, I think we're, looking at it as a pretty good community conversation.
Yep.
So she can be prepared, for what,
Yeah, I did disclose to her a number of the difficulties you had, like what happened with the small area plan and all of that, and a bit about the history of this neighborhood, and I didn't frame it as factions, but the elements we have in the neighborhood. So I don't think she was aware of what was going on up here. All right.
that sounds great.
That's this end of my item. And it's
Okay.
a perfect segue into.
Let's finish on with the agenda. So the next thing, Maurice, if you want to, this I believe was your suggestion. We had kind of talked about this too, is for the accomplishments to date. So one of the things that me and Maurice had kind of talked about is submitting something to the ANC in terms of this committee's accomplishments at the end of the fiscal year or end of the term, if you want to say that. So Maurice, you want to kind of chime in on that, and then we'll get everybody's feedback to see how you all feel, and I'll kind of tell you why I think that's critically important.
Sure. So I think it's, as we get to the end of the year, I think it's important that we look back, look at where we started, look at why we started, look at what we've done, and just summarize a list of accomplishments. And this is, I think this and the next item are kind of hand in hand. So one is looking back of here's what we've done. And then the other would be looking forward and saying, for the next iteration of this group, here's some sort of key learnings and things that we think might help the next group accomplish even more. So that's sort of where I was thinking.
And it does go really hand in hand with what we do on the ANC, because the ANC is required at the end of the year to do an annual report. And that annual report kind of wraps up everything that the ANC has accomplished through the year. So Randy has drafted that. One thing I definitely need to do is check in with him to make sure that he has a standing committee in there. And it would be great if we could put our accomplishments, in that report. So that way we show the community at Office of ANC, I believe it goes up to the mayor, what this committee has been working on. What do you guys think about that?
Yep.
Okay. Anybody want to help work on it?
I can help.
Okay,
That's fine.
and
I
I'll,
can help too. Yeah, sort of.
okay.
Put it
so
up in a
that-
Google Doc.
Yeah, Cal, Marie.
I mean, okay, I'm not muted.
And
The sense I think we need to make sure is it's not like an essay. It's more of like a bulleted list,
Mhm.
maybe with very, high level descriptions.
Yeah.
So,
And I will send an email to Randy tonight. So let me just make sure I got the names. Cal, Maurice, and Libby helping on this, right? Did I leave anybody off? Okay. So I will copy you three on an email tonight to Randy to make sure Randy has not already started on that. Because he might have, since he's doing the whole thing for the ANC. I just want to make sure we're not doing double work. And if he hasn't, we'll work on the bullet list and we'll transmit it to Randy to transmit into the document, into the ANC as a whole.
and just to everyone, who not necessarily the three of us, if you have things that you want included on the list, it doesn't just have to be the three of us defining that list. So
Yes,
if you have
definitely.
things, just throw them out.
Yep.
And we can circulate a draft on the listserv for people to review and comment before. I guess we'd probably, I don't know if we need to vote on it before the next at the next meeting as well.
Sounds great. Okay, then Maurice, does that also cover possible recommendations to the incoming ANC? Or is
I think they're two separate things. They do go hand in hand, but I think they should be two separate efforts. I'm happy to participate in both. But I think they should be distinct from each other. That's my perspective. I'm sure others folks can chime in.
Same here.
So Maurice, we're talking about accomplishments from the past and then things to work on going forward.
And I think it's more about just sort of like a message or a note to the next group, so they're not starting over from scratch. Just sort of hey, here's what we learned. Here's what we wish we would have known. Here's what we think we would have been better at had we been able to stay on track or focus on it.
Got it.
That sort of thing. It's not necessarily topics so much as just helping the committee be
Mhm.
as effective and as true to its mission as possible.
I like that. I think that'll be very helpful, especially for the incoming commissioners.
Renee agree.
Okay. So Maurice, you want to take the lead on both of these?
Sure.
Maurice, can you just keep it in one, I make a separation, keep it in one Google Doc. There's just too many separate documents to keep track of otherwise. It's mostly going to be the same people, I guess. You look
Okay.
confused.
The next one, Carl, was your suggestion on the joint program for the expelled Black Chevy Chase residents?
Yeah, there are two things. If I'm allowed, I'll make a commercial that overall historic Chevy Chase DC is approaching 2023 with the idea of making one of our major themes the celebration of the 250th birthday of George Pointer and his descendants. So we'll be doing a lot over the course of the year. that has to do with that. And the first thing that we'll be doing is to have a book talk by Torrey and Green, the authors of Between Freedom and Equality, the history of an African-American family in Washington. In other words, the Pointer descendants, Pointer and the descendants. And that's probably going to happen during MLK week, probably on Wednesday, the 18th of January. So that's all but signed, sealed, and delivered. We think it's going to happen then. It'll be a surprise if it doesn't. And along those lines, I think most of you will know that we've also had a program with the University of the District of Columbia, working with the Soul of the City grant, the foundation being led by Sharon Pratt Kelly, who helped us engineer this grant to train a set of oral historians that could, in the context of a course on Black land loss, then interview the descendants of George Pointer. And so that's been done. The interviews are almost ready to be published. We're having a meeting on that later this week. So that will happen. But when it happens, it comes with a set of recommendations that these descendants have.
Wow.
And so the question is, does this group want to co-sponsor a program in which these descendants that are expellees basically from our neighborhood address to our community? Do they want to talk about those recommendations, hear them and talk about them?
That's deep.
That's powerful.
Woo, yes, I love it. Wow, that is amazing work. That's amazing. Wow.
I'm just the voice. All the work has been done by others in my
I
heart.
mean, that is amazing. I love it.
Yeah, it's I'm quite proud of it. I mean,
Oh my God,
this group
that's
has done a great
amazing.
job, and
Yeah.
there's a fairly large document that has been composed and edited and re-edited. That is pretty comprehensive, and runs up and down the register of various things that they think it's important to consider, at least. The sidebar is that how other communities have dealt with questions like this, of course, comes up. One of our reference points was Bruce's Beach in Los Angeles, which just got a restitution after the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, to his immense credit, opened the door by introducing a proposal for legislation, which was then passed, and the family that was dispossessed at the same time that our families was dispossessed back in the 1920s is now been restituted. And so now they're sitting on this fairly lucrative payout that they've got to decide which form to take. Whether it's leasing the property back to the city. It's right on the beach in one of the, in central LA. So you can imagine, I mean, it's surrounded by multi-million-dollar houses on the beach. So it's interesting. And that was one of our reference points, just to throw that in, to give you a sense of what the group was thinking of when it was approaching the question.
So Carl, let me get this. So you got, or you're interested in if this group would want to basically co-sponsor the conversation with the descendants?
Yeah, in essence, I mean, we could talk about the exact format. It hasn't been figured out yet, but the idea would be in some form or another to make a presentation, either by having a front person deliver the summary of these recommendations, and then have a panel, let's say, of 2 or 3 of the descendants available for questions. Something like that.
I think it's awesome. Okay, what does everybody think? Everybody's quiet. We need some conversation going.
I think it's extremely powerful.
I do
I'm trying,
too.
the question that came to my mind was, you know, how do you envision sharing these recommendations? And I think you just talked about it in the sense of having a front person deliver the recommendations and then a panel to elaborate further and stimulate conversation. Yeah, because my question immediately was how do you all envision sharing these recommendations?
Yeah, let me say that the descendants are not professional public speakers or public speakers of any kind.
Yeah, I met them.
They're just, regular
Late
folks.
people. Mhm.
And so what an interaction with them will get is a lot of authenticity about how people have been thinking. I mean, they've had a chance because they've been interviewed to think about these questions. And so they'll have opinions that they'll be happy to express. But the idea of having a person deliver a summary of the recommendations would be to have that in a more polished form, let's say, so that the conversation, which will be more informal, will be more authentic.
How many of these people were aware already of the fact that they were descendants, and when did they become informed? Was it the recent work that was done with Lafayette Pointer Park, or did people know earlier?
Well, you might know that Torrey and Green, their precursor for the book was an article that appeared in Washington History back in 2015. And as Torrey and Green were writing the article, they found Tanya Hardy and James Fisher. Fisher is the 8th generation direct descendant, and Tanya is the group genealogist. And they found each other, right? And out of that meeting came a reunion that was held the next year in I think it was 2016, maybe it was 2015 already, in Lafayette Park, which later became Lafayette Pointer Park, of course. And so by that time, nearly 100 of these descendants and their families knew the story, knew enough of the story to show up for a reunion that was organized around meeting at this particular place where their families had formerly lived for 80 years. So the answer to the question, I think, is that, yeah, they know, and they knew a lot more because part of the UDC project was to make them more aware of new research that had been done on this question. And of course, the course that was taken was visited by some of these descendants as well. I mean, and some of the descendants have amazing stories. I mean, one of them left the United States and went to Ghana for 27 years because she was made to feel unwelcome in her own country. She had never been outside the United States before. I mean, that's the kind of story that's embedded in this descendant group. Not everybody's story is that dramatic, but you know, that's one that stands out, of course.
Just in a related matter, in the latest issue of Washington History magazine, there's a fascinating and moving story of one family, the Scott family, who were whose houses that they owned were bought out from under the family 5 times as they moved around the city from one African-American community neighborhood to another, and each time they were faced with, you know, some sort of, you know, slum clearance kind of thing. And so I really recommend the article. It's really well done, and I think the last, well, second to last relocation that this family had to suffer was in Fort Reno. Where several of the family members lived. So, you know, 5 times they were relocated.
Well, I think this would be excellent for us to take on. I'm curious to hear yay or nay from the rest of the group, but I mean, this is kind of a project that we're, you know, I see our housing task force recommendations kind of in here. I definitely see the community recommendations, you know, very broad. And it would be something that we could kind of, you know, make as a signature project. I think a lot of us went to the Lafayette Pointer dedication when they had it, the new recreation center, and got a chance to talk to some of the, Renee was there. I remember being Renee walking around, talk to some of the descendants. And I tell you, it is some powerful conversation to talk to people that are your age. You're looking at their kids and their grandkids, and you know, see the trajectory of their lives being displaced from the community. I think it is just so amazingly powerful, and to have a chance to bring that to the community on a broader level is really powerful.
Let's do it.
All right.
I think Livy's question was still on the floor, and that is how we want to roll out the recommendations. I think the whole conversation that we just had would be good, you know, if we had a presentation that Carl spoke about, and then before that have or after that have the recommendations that Maurice is going to work on. And in the beginning, just have the history. You know, you can do the history of Chevy Chase, history of Lafayette, Porter. You know, and all that could probably be done in 2 hours or less, hour and a half, 2 hours. And then like a question and answer period.
I could see more than one of us like holding different pieces of it. Because I think you were saying, let's have somebody from our committee run the panel Q&A, right? So I can see various number of us, you know, at least more than one person doing pieces. I want to say this is actually timely, because very timely, and for another reason, which is that I know one of the founders of my men's group, who's from Haiti, is his wife is, you know, he married into an American Black family, and she decided she didn't want to live here in 2024 if the regime changes back. And so there could be a bunch of people actually wanting to leave the country in a couple of years if things get really bad racially, which I think they would probably get much worse. If those folks get back in power, we will probably have open season on anybody who's not in their little privileged set. So I think that this is a great piece to have at this moment in our neighborhood's history and in our national history.
Yeah. Yeah. Maria?
Well, I'm just trying to figure out what it is that what's the objective? I haven't figured out the objective. So I'm not sure. I'm midway on this. What's the objective?
To communicate, just to communicate to the community, let them know what.
She froze.
Mhm.
Carl, you want to
Oh.
answer?
Yeah, it's first and foremost, it's a piece of education. I think it's just a question of allowing people to understand what has happened in the past and whether or not there's a presumption of responsibility that still the community has vis-a-vis what happened, and to hear what these descendants have to say, and let the community decide what they want to do about it. So, in other words, it's a project that is already half-baked, so to speak, and we want to continue to baking this product to fruition. It's half done. It needs to be fully, it needs to be completed. So it's one thing to have an expression from this group, what they think. But what I, at least, and others in my group have been advocating is that the follow-on has to be some engagement with the community, so that the community understands what they're feeling, and raise the question of responsibility to what gets done going forward, if anything.
Okay.
You know, it seems to me that in the sort of longer term view, we do have a responsibility to contextualize some of these stories and talk about how this is not just some odd piece of history, but there was an impact on those families that were displaced that resonates over the years in terms of generational wealth and all those sort of things. And we probably don't have to tell the moral of the story at every event and everything, but we should probably keep in our minds that it would be good to put these things into context once in a while. The story I was talking about, this family, there's 5 dislocations that they had over the years. It's just so clear when you read the history. You say, oh my God, these people never got to benefit from their hard work. They were working class people. They worked in the post office or they worked for the government. Whatever they did, and they were not able to make the most of their own labors through no fault of their own. That's the kind of context we want to put this in for the community, at least every once in a while, that it's not just ancient history, funny stories.
And this is a really great time, I think, coinciding with what we're trying to do with the Civic Core. So keep in mind the backdrop of trying to develop, which we're coming up on, a lot of movement in terms of trying to kick off that Civic Core project, and the importance of affordable housing in this area. So I don't know what the timing would be, but it seems to correspond with, some of those discussions that are going to be really front and center now. And it's a good reminder, to people to understand how important, your place, your home place, and what it can and cannot afford, and how important that really is.
Carl, do you have for each of the interviewees information about how they were more or less ejected from the land, from the neighborhood? Do you know specifics?
Well, keep in mind that the people that are being interviewed are people 2 or 3 generations removed from the eviction. So these are people that have been scattered through. I mean, so what we're talking about is people that now come into some knowledge about why they are where they are, and are reconsidering what that means in terms of the trajectory of their family and their life chances and so forth.
Right.
I mean, it started happening very early. I don't want to give a book review right now, but George Pointer and his wife Elizabeth had 3 kids, 2 girls. One of them died early, and the one that died early was actually the mother of the one who settled on Broad Branch Road. And then there was another that married, and then the third was a boy, and he ended up in Annapolis after a great flood in 1843 that wiped out the cottage that they had along the Potomac. So a lot of the family with the name Pointer, they still exist, the Pointers, ended up in Annapolis. So some of the descendants are there that we've been talking to.
Carl, do most of them still live in DC or the area, or are they scattered?
No, as I said, I mean, some of them ended up in other places. Annapolis was a major one. Some live nearby. James Fisher lives just over the district line between here and College Park, for instance.
Is this meeting in person or in Zoom?
Good question. My original thought, because of logistics, is that it happened as a Zoom meeting, but I don't know. I'm open to that. This is just an idea right now. It's just a plan or a beginning of a plan. So,
But you've
So
already picked a date for it, right?
no. The date that we have in mind right now in January is for a book talk.
Oh.
That's another event.
So Carl, you would have to at some point, I'm assuming it would be a working group planning committee where some members from race, maybe some members from your organization would work together on the logistics and putting everything together. Is that how kind of you would think it would operate?
I think so. I mean, it wouldn't take many of us.
Okay. So are we good with this? Yay.
I think we're real good with
Well,
this.
I hope Carl.
I'll report back to HCCDC then and say there's an interest in this and we can.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All right. So the last thing I have on the agenda is just real quick, the resolution for the committee and basically all of our standing committees at the end of a term. So we are cycled on a 1-year term that starts at the beginning of the year. We reappoint membership. I'll be sending out it's 1 year. Be pointing out, I'm not sure with those 2. It's 1, Carl.
Did we get this was the end of the 2-year cycle?
Yeah, I know. Yes. So we are reappointing for the FY23. So I'll send out a pretty much the same thing I sent out last time, which was a notice. I think I did it on a listserv. I'll send it on an email. And it's basically the same thing. If you want to continue in FY23 and be reappointed again, just please shoot me and Randy an email saying, yes, I want to come back. And I believe we are appointing on the 28th. I'll have to double check. but I'll put all that information in there. So just to let you guys know to look out for that. I hope everyone re-ups for the next year because it sounds like some really exciting stuff that we got potentially planned. And with the Civic Core project, we have a heck of an opportunity to, do a lot of things that this committee was originally established for. So I'm looking forward to getting all those reappoint me emails. That's the only thing I got on that. Y'all have any questions on that?
No.
If you can either call me or just shoot me an email.
Does that mean we
And-
will not be meeting in January? Because it sounds like December is our last meet. Are we meeting? We're not meeting in January then, Rays, it sounds like.
Yeah,
We are,
yeah, why not?
because you said the 28th of,
December.
oh.
Yeah,
the
there, yeah,
appointment-
it
I
won't be.
thought-
Yeah,
Okay, because last time the appointments were done in January, that's why I'm asking.
yeah.
Okay.
And I
Right.
have to double check. I don't want to give you guys the wrong date because it could be, I think our January meeting for the ANC is on the 8th. But I had written it down with the timeline. So it's either the 8th or the 12th of December. I'll get that to you guys.
What's the 8th or the 12th of December?
The appointment of the committee for fiscal year 23.
And the meeting, the next race meeting is December 20th.
Yeah,
So Lisa, we're supposed to respond to your notice that you send out.
yes. Yep.
I have to run and put kids to bed. So
Yeah, I'm about to
Okay.
fall out.
thank you, everyone, and have a happy Thanksgiving.
Okay.
Hey,
Me
take
too.
care, everyone.
Maurice, that was a great letter you did.
Say that again, Renee.
I was telling Maurice that was a great letter he wrote.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Mary Lee. Oh, there you are. Thanks, Mary Lee. Does anybody have, because there is a section on the agenda for open discussion. Does anybody have anything you want to discuss before we log off that we didn't have on the main agenda? Okay.
No.
All right. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
All. Great
All right,
meeting.
take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Stick
Bye.
around for a minute, Lisa, to talk about some logistics.
I got it, Cal. I'm wore out. I can't.